The piano sat in the corner of the train station like an afterthought, its wooden frame scarred by years of fingerprints, scratches and cigarette burns from people who had passed through and never looked back. The station itself was always alive with motion, heels striking tile floors, rolling suitcases echoing under the vaulted ceiling, announcements crackling from old speakers that always seemed to blur together. To the wealthy commuters, it was just another backdrop in their busy day. To the lost and the homeless, it was a place to stay warm without being pushed out too quickly. The air was heavy with a mixture of perfume, coffee, and the sour trace of alcohol that clung to the darker corners. On any other day, it was just noise. But on this day, someone different was watching, waiting. She blended into the crowd almost too easily, her small frame wrapped in an oversized hoodie, the sleeves dangling past her hands. Her hair, dark and messy, fell into her face as she kept her head down. To most, she looked like a child who had wandered too far. But if anyone had really looked, they would have noticed her eyes, tired, hollow, carrying more weight than any girl her age should. She clutched a plastic bag, half empty, its crinkling the only sound that followed her. Hunger gnawed at her, but she didn't ask anyone for money. She never did. Instead, she would glance at the piano like it was calling to her, then look away, ashamed, as if the world had already told her she didn't belong near it. People laughed at her sometimes, not cruel laughter at first, but the kind that dismissed her existence. A smirk, a whisper, a nudge between friends. Look at her. She thinks she's one of us. The laughter stung in ways they would never understand, because behind her silence was a gift no one could have imagined, but no one cared to ask. Across town, life looked very different. In the GSs, arse towers that stretched into the sky, people in pressed suits argued over numbers that would never touch the girls' world. At the cafes, students complained about exams, sipping overpriced coffee while scrolling on their glowing phones. In a neighborhood lined with sharp gates and security cameras, a family sat down for dinner, their silverware clinking against fine china. On the surface, everything seemed normal, ordinary, but even in those places of comfort, cracks were forming. Among them was a man whose life had been built on appearances. To most, he was a respected figure, wealthy, charming, the type of person who spoke with ease at fundraisers while shaking the right hands. But behind his polished smile was a man restless with dissatisfaction. His wife carried her own silent bitterness, hidden beneath layers of makeup and carefully chosen dresses. Their son, spoiled and cruel, had grown into the kind of young man who never faced consequences, laughing at the weak because he could. And though they seemed far removed from the station, the truth was their paths would soon cross with the girls in ways none of them could predict. That night the air had a different weight to it. A storm was rolling in, pressing low against the city, stirring the streets with uneasy wind. The girl had not eaten in 2 days. Her stomach burned, her throat dry, but she sat on the cold bench across from the piano, watching as strangers hurried past. She was too proud to beg, but desperation was tightening around her like a rope. She looked at the piano again, her heart beating faster. She had played once, long ago, when life was different, when her mother's laugh still echoed in the house, and her father hadn't disappeared into his addictions. Back then, music had been her refuge, her secret language. Now it felt like a distant dream, but the piano still waited, silent, patient. She whispered the words almost to herself. "Can I play for food?" No one stopped to listen. No one cared. The laughter came again, sharper this time, from a group of teenagers lounging nearby, recording her on their phones. They mocked her torn shoes, her baggy clothes, her trembling voice. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the shadows, but the hunger was stronger than her fear. She rose slowly, her small hand brushing against the wooden surface of the piano. The teenagers snickered louder. And yet, as her fingers touched the keys, the sound that followed was nothing like what they expected. The notes spilled out, haunting and perfect, filling the station with a voice older than the girl herself. The laughter faltered, replaced by silence. Heads turned. For the first time, people really looked at her. What they didn't know was that this moment, the sound of a homeless girl daring to be heard, was only the beginning of something much darker. Because watching her from the far corner, unnoticed in the crowd, was someone whose interest was not in her music, but in her weakness. Someone who saw opportunity where others saw talent. Someone who, in the days to come, would turn her gift into her curse. The music that spilled from her hands that night did not leave the station when the last notes faded. It clung to the walls, echoing in the memory of those who heard it. Strangers whispered about the homeless girl with the piano, some with awe, others with scorn, and a few with envy. For the girl, it was a fragile moment of dignity, but it also marked the beginning of the attention she was not prepared for. Attention, she would soon learn, was not always a gift. It could be a weapon. The teenagers who had mocked her filmed everything. The video, shaky and cruel, made its way onto social media before dawn. It was shared not because of her talent, but because of the contrast. The ragged girl who sat hunched over a piano, looking like she belonged nowhere, playing like she belonged everywhere. Some laughed, calling her a fraud, swearing the sound must have been fake. Others were moved, curious, even sympathetic. The girl didn't know any of this yet. She only felt the stares the next day, sharper, heavier. The world had noticed her, but not in the way she had hoped. Among those who noticed was the man from across town. He watched the video in his study late at night, glass of whiskey in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. The girl's face stirred something in him, part fascination, part calculation. Here was a story he could use, a figure he could control. He had built his life on manipulating appearances, and she was a blank canvas. No family, no money, no power, vulnerable in every way. To him, she wasn't a child to be pitied. She was an asset, waiting to be claimed. His wife, meanwhile, had already grown tired of his obsessions. She saw the way he leaned toward the screen, the way he rewound the video again and again, studying the girl's hands. Jealousy burned in her chest, though she couldn't explain why. It wasn't romantic desire that threatened her. It was something else, something uglier. He had never looked at her that way, not even when they were young. For years, she had been trapped in a marriage that demanded perfection, but offered no warmth. Seeing him captivated by a starving child cut her deeper than any affair could. Their son, restless and spoiled, saw the video too. But unlike his father, he laughed without thinking. To him the girl was nothing but a joke to share with his friends, another punchline in his life where cruelty was entertainment. Yet underneath his laughter was something darker, anger at how quickly people praised her. He had spent his life handed everything, yet no one ever looked at him with the kind of admiration strangers gave this nameless girl. Envy took root, small at first, but growing sharper with every passing day. The girl herself had no idea how these lives were aligning against her. All she knew was that after that first performance, people began expecting her to play again. Some brought food and left it by the piano, small offerings of kindness. Others mocked her more openly now, daring her to play like she was a sideshow attraction. The attention frightened her, but hunger was stronger. Each time she played, she felt both seen and exposed. She had always thought her gift would be her way out, but now it felt like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Whispers began to follow her. Rumors spread in the city about who she was, where she had come from. Some said she was lying about being homeless, that she was just another scammer. Others claimed she was mentally unstable, that no child could play like that without being damaged somehow. The kindness of strangers soured quickly, replaced by suspicion and judgment. And still, she kept playing, because the piano was the only place where the world's cruelty couldn't reach her. The man finally approached her one evening, his expensive shoes clicking against the station floor. He smiled as though he were a savior, offering her food first, then small bills, then promises of more. His words dripped with charm, cloaked in care, but beneath them was control. He told her she had talent, that she could be more than this, that he could make her someone the world would admire. She wanted to believe him. For a girl who had lost everything, hope was the most dangerous gift of all. His wife watched the arrangement unfold from a distance, seething. To her, the girl was not a prodigy, but a threat, a symbol of everything she had lost in her marriage. She convinced herself that the man's obsession with the child was not about music, but about filling some emptiness he had never admitted. Her jealousy grew into hatred, not of him, but of the girl who had taken his attention so easily. The son, however, decided to act differently. His envy turned into games of cruelty. He began showing up at the station with friends, taunting the girl, daring her to play while recording her reactions. At first, it was mockery. Then it became more physical, blocking her way, kicking at her bag, shoving her when no one was looking. Each time, the girl swallowed her anger, refusing to fight back. But the humiliation cut deeper than hunger ever had. Pressure built in every direction. The man wanted control, his wife wanted revenge, and his son wanted to break her. The girl only wanted to survive, yet each note she played pulled her further into their tangled lives. The city itself seemed to close in on her, a place where kindness always had strings attached, where poverty made her invisible until it made her useful. Secrets from the past began to surface too. The man's wealth was not as solid as it appeared. Debts whispered in the shadows, deals gone wrong, reputations slipping. A wife knew this, and she saw in the girl not just a rival for attention, but a pawn in his desperate schemes. The son too carried secrets. Violence at school covered up by his father's money, whispers of things done in the dark that his mother pretended not to hear. The family was rotting from the inside, and the girl, unknowingly, had stepped right into the middle of it. The girl herself carried her own hidden scars. Memories of her mother's slow death, the nights spent in shelters where safety was never certain, the sound of her father's fists breaking doors when he was drunk. Music had been her only escape, her only proof that she was worth more than the world told her. But now, even music felt dangerous, because it had drawn the wrong eyes. Every encounter tightened the knot of tension. The man pressed harder, insisting she trust him, offering promises that sounded less like kindness and more like commands. The wife grew colder, her bitterness spilling into sharp words and veiled threats. The son's cruelty escalated, his laughter more vicious, his violence more daring. And through it all the girl kept playing, each note carrying her closer to the moment when all these lives would collide in something irreversible. The fragile world around her was breaking, piece by piece, though no one yet knew just how far it would go. The night the crime unfolded, the city carried an uneasy stillness, as if it sensed something was about to break. Rain tapped against the station roof, echoing through the cavernous space. The piano sat in its usual place, its wooden frame glistening faintly under the dim lights, waiting for her hands to touch it again. The girl hesitated before sitting down, her thin body trembling from the cold. Hunger twisted in her stomach, but the weight pressing on her chest was heavier. She felt watched, though she couldn't say from where. The man had told her earlier that day to meet him there. His promises still rang in her head. Food, safety, maybe even a future beyond these cracked floors. He had spoken with such authority that she wanted to believe him. But there was something in his eyes she didn't trust, something that felt less like kindness, and more like ownership. She came anyway because desperation has a way of silencing doubt. He arrived with his son, who trailed behind him, smirking as though the whole situation was a joke. The man's wife followed later, her heels striking against the wet floor, her face carved into a mask of bitterness. The family gathered in the shadows of the station, circling her without speaking at first, like predators who hadn't yet decided who would strike. The girl placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The notes rose, fragile and beautiful, filling the empty station with something pure. But beneath the music was tension so thick it choked the air. The man's eyes glistened with hunger, not for the sound, but for the power it promised him if he could control it. His wife's lips curled with disgust, her mind screaming that this child had stolen something from her she would never get back. The son leaned against a pillar, laughing under his breath, itching to humiliate her once more. Then the moment cracked. The wife spoke first, her voice sharp, accusing her husband of being obsessed. The words cut through the music, shattering the spell. The man snapped back, his charm slipping into cruelty, his hand tightening around the girl's shoulder as if to claim her. The son joined in, mocking them both, mocking the girl, mocking everything he didn't understand. The girl tried to keep playing, her fingers trembling, but the music faltered under the weight of their voices. The argument escalated. Shouts ricocheted off the walls, echoing louder than the rain. The girl stood, her chest heaving, trying to step away. But the man wouldn't release her. His grip dug into her arm, pulling her back toward the piano, insisting she continue, insisting she was nothing without him. Panic surged in her throat, her breath quick and shallow. She tried to protest, but the words stuck, drowned out by their fury. The wife snapped then. Years of resentment, humiliation and rage boiled over in one sharp scream. She lunged, shoving the girl away from her husband, but the force sent the child stumbling into the piano. The crash of the keys rang out like a scream. The son laughed, high and cruel, and that sound, his laughter, was the final spark. The girl shoved back, her fear twisting into desperation, and in the chaos, the man struck out to regain control. No one could later say whose hand caused the final blow. The wife's shove, the man's grasp, the son's cruel push, it all blurred together in an instant of violence. The girl's head hit the edge of the piano with a sickening crack. The music stopped. Silence swallowed the station, thicker than the rain, heavier than any of them could bear. For a moment, none of them moved. The girl lay crumpled against the bench, her small body unnaturally still. Blood trickled across the worn wood, soaking into the cracks of the keys. Her eyes fluttered once, wide with shock, then dimmed as the last bit of life drained from her. The piano, the one place she had ever been free, became her coffin. The man's breath came fast, ragged. His hands trembled, but not with grief, rather with the panic of realization. He hadn't meant for it to go this far, or had he? The wife staggered back, clutching her chest, horror twisting her face as the weight of what had happened settled in. Her rage had blinded her, and now there was no taking it back. The son's smirk finally vanished, replaced by wide-eyed shock. For the first time, he saw the consequences of cruelty laid out before him, bloody and real. Chaos erupted in their minds. The man barked orders, telling them no one could know, that they had to protect themselves. His voice was cold, commanding, already calculating. The wife shook her head, tears streaming, her voice breaking as she whispered that it was an accident, that no one would believe otherwise. The son stayed frozen, his hands slick with sweat, staring at the girl's body as if expecting her to rise again. Together, they dragged her from the piano, their movements frantic, clumsy. The sound of her limp body scraping against the floor haunted them, louder than any scream. The man's face was stone, determined to erase the evidence, to rewrite the story before anyone could discover the truth. The wife sobbed as she helped, her tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. The The son gagged, his stomach twisting, but he didn't stop. None of them stopped. When they finally stepped back, her small frame lay hidden in the shadows of the station, the blood already cooling. The piano stood silent, stained and broken, its song forever cut short. The rain poured harder outside, drowning the world in grey. They left separately, each carrying the weight of what had been done. The man wrapped his panic in determination, already planning lies, already deciding what story the world would hear. The wife carried her guilt like a poison, knowing she had let hatred guide her hand. The son carried fear, the kind that clings to the soul and never lets go. But the station carried the truth. The walls had heard the shouts, the piano had felt the final blow, and the silence that followed would never let them forget. The crime was done, but the storm it unleashed had only just begun. Morning came heavy and grey, the kind of morning that seemed to press against the skin. The train station carried no sign of what had happened hours before. Commuters hurried through as they always did, sipping coffee, checking their phones, unaware that the silence of the piano was not from neglect, but from violence. The girl's body was gone, hidden by hands that had worked through the night. But absence leaves its own trail. Her bench was empty, her bag missing, and the piano carried a faint stain that no one had noticed yet. The man moved quickly. He told himself it had been necessary, that it was better to control the story than allow the truth to spill out. He used his money, his influence, to cover the cracks before anyone could peer inside. To his associates, he spoke calmly, claiming he was helping a child in need, but she had run away, ungrateful, unstable. He crafted a version of events that painted him as the victim of her unpredictability. Outwardly, he was polished, rehearsed. Inside, though, his mind churned, replaying the moment her head struck the piano, the sickening sound that no lie could erase. He drowned those echoes with whiskey, but they returned each night, louder. His wife unraveled differently. The anger that had consumed her turned into guilt, corrosive and relentless. She couldn't sleep without seeing the girl's face, her wide eyes in that final instant before the light left them. She scrubbed her hands raw, convinced she could still feel the child's blood on them. To the world she appeared pale, withdrawn, but silent. To her husband she offered no comfort and accepted none. Their marriage, already cracked, was now a hollow shell where two guilty strangers lived side by side. The son carried the heaviest shadow in his own way. He had mocked the girl, pushed her, laughed woo. "Hen," she begged. And though he hadn't intended to kill, he knew his cruelty had brought them all there. For the first time, he tasted real fear. Not the shallow kind he brushed off at school when teachers scolded him, but the kind that burrowed into the bones. He tried to laugh it off with his friends, tried to convince himself it was just another joke gone wrong. But his nights betrayed him. He woke drenched in sweat, her broken body flashing behind his eyelids. His friends noticed his unease, his short temper, his sudden silence, but none knew why. The girl's absence did not go unnoticed. For weeks, she had become a small, fragile fixture in the station, and when she was gone, people began to whisper. Some assumed she had moved on, found shelter, maybe even been taken in by someone kinder. Others were not so convinced. A woman who often brought her food raised the first alarm, reporting her missing. Slowly, her name, or what little of it anyone knew, surfaced in conversations. The video of her playing, once a novelty, returned to people's feeds, now tinged with unease. The piano prodigy had vanished, and the world was beginning to ask why. The media seized it. Articles painted her as a tragic figure, a homeless child whose talent had touched strangers, but whose life was marked by neglect. Reporters demanded answers. Where was she? Who had last seen her? Who had failed her? Her face, once blurred in the background of a viral clip, now stared out from screens with a haunting stillness. The public clung to her story, some out of pity, others out of outrage. She had become a symbol, a reminder of the invisible children society steps over until they disappear. The man's reputation faltered under the weight of those questions. His wealth and connections could not silence every rumor, every whisper. People began to recall seeing him at the station, speaking to her, offering help. To some, this made him look generous. To others, it made him look dangerous. His wife's bitterness seeped into her words in private conversations, planting seeds of doubt that spread quickly. The son's cruelty leaked from classmates who remembered his laughter, his taunts. The family's polished image began to crumble, and no amount of money could glue it back together. Psychologically, they each carried their own prison. The man convinced himself he had done what was necessary, but in the quiet hours, he argued with himself, torn between pride and horror. His wife could no longer look at him without seeing the monster he had always been, though she blamed herself as well, her guilt eating her alive. The son withdrew into himself, his bravado stripped away, leaving only shame and a growing dread that someday someone would uncover the truth. The community reacted with outrage and sorrow. For some, the girl's story became personal, a reminder of their own failures to notice the invisible among them. Candlelight vigils formed near the station, flowers left by the piano, prayers whispered for a soul no one had saved in time. Musicians came to play in her honor, their notes trembling with grief. Strangers cried for her as though she had been theirs, mourning the beauty of a gift that the world had wasted. But behind those tears lingered anger. Anger at the system that let her slip through its cracks, at the people who mocked her, at the unnamed forces that had silenced her music. That anger turned to suspicion, and suspicion to questions, and questions, if asked often enough, would eventually find their answers. The family tried to move on, but their leave. Hess had changed forever. Their home felt colder, their meals quieter. Every glance carried unspoken accusations, every silence carried the weight of the girl's absence. They were bound together not by love, but by a shared crime, each one silently blaming the others, each one silently breaking. The girl's music lived on in recordings strangers had saved, echoing through phones and speakers, her ghost haunting those who had once dismissed her. Her absence had become louder than her presence ever was, and in that absence, the truth waited, patient and unrelenting. The aftermath of the crime was not just a wound for those who had caused it. It was a wound for everyone who had ever passed her by, who had laughed, ignored, or turned away. It was a reminder of what cruelty costs, and of how quickly silence can bury a life that should have been heard. The silence that followed her disappearance could not last forever. Secrets, no matter how carefully buried, always find cracks to escape through. For weeks, the family tried to live as though nothing had changed, but the world around them was shifting. Investigators began asking questions, tracing timelines, pulling at threads. The man's wealth and charm slowed the process, but suspicion lingered, persistent and sharp. His wife's trembling nerves, the son's sudden withdrawal, their fractured unity, each piece drew attention they could not afford. Eventually, the truth bled through. The discovery of her body shattered the city. She was found not far from the station, hidden but not well enough. The piano prodigy who had once filled the cold space with music now lay silent, her story ending in a place no child should have been. The revelation ignited outrage. Newspapers carried her picture on their front pages, headlines condemning the cruelty that had silenced her. The video of her playing resurfaced, now framed with grief. What once made people smile now made them weep. The man was arrested first. His name, once spoken with respect, became a curse. In court, his charm faltered under the weight of evidence and testimony. The prosecution painted him not as a benefactor, but as a manipulator who had preyed on a vulnerable child. His polished reputation crumbled piece by piece, replaced by the image of a man who would sacrifice innocence for control. He sat stone-faced as judgment fell, but inside, Panic clawed at him. He had built his life on power, and now it was gone. The wife broke before the trial ended. Racked with guilt, she confessed her role, her voice cracking as she admitted to the shove that had set the chain of violence in motion. Her confession shocked many, but it also revealed the truth of her torment. The years of bitterness, the jealousy that had curdled into hatred, and the unbearable guilt that followed. Some pitied her, others despised her, but no one could ignore the tragedy of a woman destroyed by her own rage. The son faced his own reckoning. His cruelty, once dismissed as childish arrogance, was dragged into the light. Teachers spoke of his violence, peers testified to his taunts, videos surfaced of his mockery at the station. Though young, his actions were undeniable. The court weighed his age against the damage he had done, and though the sentence was less severe than his father's, his future was marked by a stain he could never erase. The boy who once laughed without consequence was now a symbol of what unchecked cruelty can grow into. Justice, in the legal sense, was served. The man faced years behind bars, his wealth stripped, his power gone. The wife, though broken, received her punishment as well, her confession earning her no escape from prison. The son, sentenced to rehabilitation and correction, carried a punishment of a different kind. The lifelong burden of guilt and the knowledge that he had destroyed not only a life, but his own. The family, once envied, was ruined, their name forever tied to the tragedy. But justice in the deeper sense was harder to define. The girl could not be brought back. Her music, though preserved in recordings, could never again rise from her own hands. Her life, short and brutal, became another reminder of the world's failure to protect its most vulnerable. No sentence could balance that loss. The community mourned not just the girl, but the silence she left behind. Vigils were held by the piano, flowers piled high, and candles flickered through the night. Strangers played in her honor, their notes trembling with grief and reverence. She had become more than a girl. She was a symbol, a haunting reminder of what happens when cruelty goes unchecked. The societal impact spread beyond the station. Laws were debated, reforms proposed, discussions sparked about how children like her could be seen and protected before it was too late. Activists spoke her name, demanding change, demanding accountability. She had been invisible in life, but in death, she could not be ignored. Her story forced people to confront uncomfortable truths, that poverty isolates, that cruelty thrives in silence, that power can corrupt even the appearance of kindness. On a deeper level, the crime revealed the fragility of human morality. The man had convinced himself he was helping, even as he controlled. The wife believed she was justified in her jealousy until it consumed her. The son laughed until his laughter turned to horror. Each of them crossed lines slowly, step by step, until the unthinkable became reality. It was not one act, but many small acts of cruelty and neglect that built up to the crime. In that, the story reflected a truth about human nature. Evil often does not arrive with a roar, but creeps in quietly through pride, envy, and selfishness. The power dynamics at the heart of the crime were also clear. A child with nothing became prey for those with everything, her weakness exploited, her gift twisted into a curse. Wealth shielded cruelty for a time, but in the end, it could not hide it forever. The family's fall was a reminder that power without morality is hollow, and that control built on exploitation eventually collapses. In the end, the girl's legacy was not only in her music, but in the reflection her story forced upon those who heard it. Strangers who had once walked past her now remembered her as a voice they ignored too long. Parents saw her face and thought of their own children. Lawmakers debated her case as they sought to repair the cracks she had slipped through. Her tragedy became a mirror, showing society not only who she was, but who they were in failing her. The piano at the station remained. Its keys, once stained, were cleaned, but its sound carried the weight of memory. People still played it, but every note carried a shadow of her, as if her spirit lingered in the wood. Passers-by sometimes paused, not to laugh, but to listen. And in those moments, she was not forgotten. Justice was imperfect, as it always is. The guilty were punished, but the innocent remained lost. Yet her story lived on, not in silence, but in echoes, reminders of the cruelty that killed her, and of the music that made her unforgettable. The world moved forward, but it carried her with it, a fragile reminder of how quickly laughter can turn to tragedy, and how easily power can destroy the powerless. Her name, her music, her short life, these became more than memory. They became a lesson, written in sorrow, that demanded to be heard.